begin our JLAC committee hearing. First, want to thank everyone for attending the hearing. I know it's a busy time, and we will try to get rid of our work expeditiously. I strongly encourage members to come to the committee to attend the hearing as soon as possible so a quorum can be established and we can continue with our hearing. Secretary, please call the roll for the members that are here.
Excuse me, Laura?
Here.
Laura here. Alejo? Donnelly? Huber? Monning?
Here.
Monning here. Norby? Smythe? Smythe here. Alquist? Anderson? De Leon? Dutton? Lamalfa? Lamalfa here. Rubio? Rubio here. Wolk? Wolk here.
Great. Seeing that we don't have a quorum, we're going to begin as a subcommittee. I encourage our sergeants to call the members. Today we'll be considering one new audit request. It is item 2011-131 by Speaker Perez and Senator De Leon. The subject is the City of Vernon and the city's Light and Power Department. Members, the request letter and the analysis are in your packets. Before we begin with the presentation, our State Auditor, Elaine Howe, is going to give the committee an update on her work in progress and how the audit will affect her ongoing work. Welcome, Ms. Howe. Good morning.
Good morning, Mr. Chair, members. For the record, Elaine Howell, California State Auditor. Just a quick status report. As you all know, we had a hearing a couple of weeks ago on August 24th where the committee considered several requests and actually approved 8 audit requests. We haven't started any of those audits yet because, as I indicated at the August JLAC hearing, we would have enough staff and resources to start audits between late September, October through January. So if the audit that is before you today is approved, we would do the best we could to start that audit immediately if that's the pleasure of the committee. And then we would still be able to start the remaining 8 audits. They would just be started after this one if this one becomes a priority. So we do have enough staff to start and all of the audits that were approved a couple of weeks ago, as well as the audit before you today. So with that, I'm certainly able to answer any questions members may have.
Great, thank you. Are there any questions from the committee members? Great. Go ahead, Senator Wolk.
My only question has to do with what you just mentioned. Mm-hmm. From my perspective, I think this has immediate importance. But again, I don't remember the details on the ones that are listed, discretionary audits in progress. Will there be how are we and you going to come up with a system of priorities?
Well, the committee, the 8 audits that were approved at the last hearing, there wasn't a priority given to any specific audit request. Certainly, if this one is given priority today by the committee, we'll start this one immediately as soon as we have resources, which would be within the next few weeks. And then based on staff that free up, as you can see in our work in progress, we have an audit going out later this month, another one in October, a couple in November. So as those staff free up, we'll start some of the audits that the committee approved a couple of weeks ago. And typically, Senator, when we staff up audits, we try to match the resources to the type of audit that has been requested or approved by the committee. So it's really based on the resources we have available. Also, in some cases, the size of the audit. For audits that are particularly large, we may want to get those started sooner so that we can get the results to the legislature promptly next year, sometime in the spring. So, for example, if there's an audit that we think is going to take 7 months, which is the one today that you're looking at or considering today, we would want to start those sooner so that we can get the results to the legislature in a timely manner next year.
And on these priorities, do you work with the chair, and is that how you?
Well, the committee usually sets the priorities if it so chooses, but beyond that, we don't work with the committee other than at a hearing like today.
Thank you. Any other questions for our State Auditor? It looks like we have a quorum, so Secretary, please call the absent members.
Alejo, Donnelly, Donnelly here. Huber, Norby, Norby here. Alquist, Anderson, Dutton. Oh, I'm sorry, De Leon.
I'd be glad
Here.
to move. Mr. Chair, when you're ready, I'll be glad to move it.
Great. Perfect. Thank you so much. Senator De Leon is here, and Assembler Smythe is here on behalf of Speaker to present the audit. If we can have the requesters please come forward. Good morning, Senator De Leon.
As well, members of the JLAC committee. It's an honor to be here with each and every one of you. I welcome my good colleague and my former colleague on the Assembly side, Mr. Cameron Smythe. It's unfortunate we don't have the Speaker, John Perez, here, but nonetheless, he's a fine substitute, Mr. Cameron Smythe. Mr. Chair, as well as members, both Speaker John Perez and I are here together in unison to request an immediate joint legislative audit of the City of Vernon's publicly owned and operated light and power department. As stated on the audit request, that I am particularly concerned with the long-term financial health of the City of Vernon. I believe that this is an audit that is critical given the unknown status of the city's finances and the recent reports of an Internal Revenue Service audit. Furthermore, the audit will allow us to understand the utilities management structure and operations to ensure that we address potential consequences that may put the utility and ultimately the city in financial harm. The legislature has made it a priority to clean up the self-dealing cronyism in the City of Vernon. This audit is a critical element in achieving that goal and must begin as soon as possible. We took on the City of Bell with AB 900 to bring about some transparency, and of course, Mr. Lauer and I, we worked together with regards to a reimbursement of $3 million. As you know very well, there is a lot of corruption in and around the southeast cities, starting with the city of Maywood and others who historically, such as Southgate, have had a long history of corruption. This is an opportunity to start a new page and make sure we do things in such a manner, hopefully with the expertise that Elaine Howell has and her fine staff, we can make sure that we have transparency and that, in fact, the City of Vernon, if it stays intact and complete together in the future, that it has a fine financial health outlook from that point forward. With that, I think Mr. Smythe will be making a few comments.
Thank you, Senator, and thank you, committee. As most of you know, I was also the principal co-author of AB 46 and 781. And a key provision of that legislation did include and authorize the auditor to audit the administrative and financial operations of the city. Over the last several months, everybody is well aware and has seen the concerns at the City of Vernon, and they certainly are amplified by investigations into their pension system, salary structure, utility operations, and bond indebtedness, all of which have occurred outside of the legislature. As we know, there are still concerns about what has not been uncovered in the City of Vernon, and as Senator De Leon alluded to, the City of Bell was as an example where significant criminal and financial activity were uncovered. And there, the City Council invited the State Controller to come in, and the Speaker, Senator De Leon, and I believe that a similar audit of the City of Vernon is necessary and that the Bureau of State Audits is the best place to do it. Specifically, as outlined in the request, the audit should include the following points: an examination of the city charter and any proposed changes to it, an examination of the current governance structure in the City of Vernon, a review of the revenue sources and expenditures, comparison of salaries, benefits, and pension packages of high-level staff and elected officials, a review of the contracting practices for services provided to the city, and a comprehensive review of all bond issuances over the past 7 years. And again, along with Senator De Leon and Speaker Perez, ask for your support in this audit request. And we also do request that this audit be given priority, as alluded to by the auditor in her opening comments.
Right. Thank you, Senator Smythe. I will have our state auditor give her analysis.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. As Senator De Leon and the Speaker have requested, and Assemblymember Smythe has indicated, this audit would be both of the City of Vernon and the Light and Power Department in Vernon. The first objective that we've been asked to look at is the city charter. looking at their current charter, and it's our understanding there are some proposed changes to the charter, so we've been asked as well to look at those proposed changes. To the extent we can, we will compare the city charter to comparable cities in California, and again, that's to the extent we can, but we certainly intend to look at their current charter and the proposed changes. In addition to that, looking at the governance structure, again, for both the City of Vernon and the Light and Power Department, and when we're talking about the governance structure, we're talking about individuals, officials in the city, what their roles and responsibilities are, what their authority is, et cetera, both employees as well as any consultants or contractors, what types of authority and responsibility those individuals have been given. Now, for both the city and the department, again, the Light and Power Department, looking at their operational structure, and what we mean by that rather than governance structure, operational structure is talking about what types of controls do they have in place, what are the policies and practices that are expected to be followed. So that will lay out the framework for us to test those controls to make sure that those individuals who have certain responsibilities are exercising that responsibility and authority to protect the fiscal status within the city and the power department. An objective related to compensation, again, for both, looking at high-level staff, both elected officials and consultants, not only determining what their salaries, benefits, pension packages are, but who made the decision to offer that type of a salary or that type of a compensation package. How was that package determined and who approved that package? To the extent we can, we will do some comparisons as well. We actually have a copy of a report that the city had done back in April of this year. That will be the beginning for us as far as a starting point to try to do some comparisons. They've identified some comparable cities and actually did some analysis. So we'll certainly take advantage of that information and perhaps take it a little bit further. A couple of objectives ask us to look at a 5-year window, specifically looking at 5 years' worth of both revenue sources, where their revenue is coming from, and what their expenditures look like over that 5-year period. In addition to that, taking that one step further and actually doing what we call transaction testing, which means we're going to test the expenditures to make sure that those expenditures were appropriate and were within the reasonable nature of what those expenditures were for, so determine appropriateness of those expenditures. In addition to that, we've been asked to look at their contracting practices from start to finish, the bidding process, the approval process, who monitors these contracts to make sure that they're complying with laws, applicable regulations, and again, back to their policies and procedures. Similar to the expenditure testing, we've been asked to look at testing some contract transactions. So specifically looking at professional services contracts, pull a sample of those, determine again if they're following policies and procedures, are the expenditures related to those contracts appropriate, what types of services is the city and or the power department receiving for those via those contracts. One objective that's specific to the city is related to bonds, bond issuances over a 7-year window. And they've asked us to look at both the number of bonds and the value of the bonds that have been issued by the city. Specifically looking at those bond issuances, what are, again, you always start with policies and procedures. What was the purpose of those bonds? What was the intent in the first place in issuing those bonds? And then what did they do with the proceeds that they received after they issued the bonds? Did they align with what that initial purpose of the original intent of the bond was for? And then in conjunction with that, looking at the bonds overall, again, we're looking at a 7-year window. What did that do to the status of their debt service? How did it impact, as Senator De Leon mentioned, how does that impact the fiscal stability of the city? What is that debt service? What kind of a burden is that on the city of Vernon? So looking at that as well. Now, switching to the department, we've also been asked to look at bonds that the Light and Power Department issued, a narrower window, a 5-year window for the Light and Power Department, but similar objectives. The number and value of the bonds that have been issued, again, the policies and procedures, what was the purpose of those bonds, was it well defined, and then when they did issue the bonds, what did they do with the proceeds? Were they used appropriately? Are they in alignment with what the original intent of issuing that bond was for? again, the status of the debt service. What's the impact on the department's finances as opposed to the city? And then actions that the department has taken or intends to take to try to mitigate the fiscal impact of having a significant amount of debt. As you're probably aware, there have been articles in the LA Times about millions upon millions of dollars in bonds being issued, and that really putting both the city and the Light and Power Department under a tremendous amount of stress, fiscal stress at this point. So assessing both the bond issuances by the city and by the Light and Power Department to determine what that has done to the fiscal stability of the city and the department itself. And then one objective, again, specific to the department, is looking at professional services contracts. We've been asked to look at a 5-year window specific to the department and identify the types of services for which the department chose to contract, and that's very specific to professional services contracts. That's the last objective. The budget for this audit is 2,980 hours. That's about a 7-month audit, and the reason we believe the hours need to be that high is because we're looking at windows of time, 5 years for various expenditure testing, 5 years for contracts, 7 years for bonds, et cetera. So we felt to do a thorough job and provide the information the legislature needs, that's the budget that we came up with. So with that, I'll attempt to answer questions.
Thank you. There's already a motion by Ms. Walker, and we'll take that as a second. This time we're going to have representatives from Vernon come forward.
I'm Gene Urban on behalf of the City of Vernon. I just have a couple brief remarks, and I want to introduce Mr. Whitworth, who is the Fire Chief and Chief Administrative Officer of the City of Vernon, who also has some equally brief remarks. Just 2 comments. The letter refers to an IRS investigation. It's a examination. It's not an investigation. In the financial world, that's not an unimportant distinction, so I would ask that that be modified. We welcome the audit. But I also want to point out, and I believe the auditor is very aware of this, but I want the committee to be equally aware of it, there are a number of very meaningful reforms being instituted as we speak, from charter elections through ordinances, through internal practices. It's not static, and we are prepared to cooperate with the auditor, but things will be changing as she examines us. I think there's a deep appreciation of that, but we are in the process of embarking on a whirlwind of meaningful systemic reform, and we look forward to that being incorporated into the audit. And with that, I'd just like to introduce Mark very briefly.
Good morning, Honorable Chair Lara and committee members. I'm Mark Whitworth, City Administrator with the City of Vernon. I'm here today to heartedly endorse the proposed state audit of the City of Vernon's finances and the City of Vernon's Department of Light and Power. Our city traditionally has provided for an independent audit of both the city and the Department of Light and Power. The city's independent auditor, Macias, Ginny, and O'Connell, is one of the top accounting firms in the state of California and audits major cities, counties, and state agencies. They have been the city's independent auditor since 1999. In addition, our Department of Light and Power is audited by a number of regulatory agencies, and the results of those audits have been positive. We are happy to share all of that information with the state auditor. We will provide the state auditor with whatever information it needs during the course of this review. With respect to the bonds that have been issued by the Department of Light and Power, our bond counsel, Oric Harrington, and our advisors stand ready to cooperate with the state auditors. The Internal Revenue Service has initiated an examination of the bonds issued by the Department of Light and Power in 2009. We are fully cooperating with the IRS in that review. The city also now is in the midst of implementing a historic package of reforms to our governance structures in response to recommendations urged by Senator Kevin De Leon and the city's independent ethics advisor, former Attorney General John Van de Kamp. With the help of these outside independent evaluations of our practices and operations, we are on a path to becoming a model of good governance. And we will provide the state auditor with the information it needs regarding our governance practices and these reform measures. We look forward to this opportunity to work with the state and to demonstrate the continued financial health of the City of Vernon and our Department of Light and Power. Our city has been under the microscope for some time now, but we are confident that our commitment to transparency and working cooperatively with those who are trying to help us improve will help us reach our goal of becoming a model city.
Thank you. At this time, I'm going to take questions from committee members. I know Mr. Monning had a question.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I want to thank Senator De Leon and Assemblymember Smythe on behalf of the Speaker for bringing this audit request forward, and the auditor for providing both your analysis and mobilization of resources to be able to respond to this I would call emergency request or high priority request. I don't know all the history of Vernon other than what I've read in the newspapers. I do know there have been criminal investigations and some criminal indictments, and I'm wondering if that will pose any barrier to accessing records, if records are subject to subpoena in a criminal case, and conversely, whether there's any possibility to cooperate with those criminal investigations who have maybe pursued similar documentation. Does the state auditor have authority to access information gathered in a criminal investigation that might reduce the hours that your staff needs to gather information from scratch?
Under audit standards, Assemblymember Monning, we do have to keep in mind if there is an ongoing investigation. That does not prohibit us or preclude us from gaining access to records that we would need. This has happened in the past. Now, to the extent we are conducting audit work and we run across something that we believe it may lead to criminal charges, then we work very closely with either local authorities or the Attorney General's office, and in an instance, we may have to turn information over to them. As far as access to information, we have worked with the Attorney General's office in the past where we've been able to understand from them what they're working on. Now, we would be prohibited from publishing that information in an audit report because it's an ongoing criminal investigation. We wouldn't want to do anything to impair an investigation, but we certainly would have the ability to coordinate with them and understand what they're doing and be able to see some of the information that they have gathered and looked at.
Thank you.
The limitation would be what we can publish in a public report at the time an investigation may be going on.
Right, I understand. And have you had any experience where you've been conducting an audit simultaneous to criminal investigations or criminal prosecutions where you can economize any of your staff allocations by having access to or utilizing information or data gathered through that criminal investigation?
To my knowledge, under my leadership, we haven't had an opportunity like that. Prior to my becoming state auditor, we did have an audit we did, I think it was at Downey Hospital, where we worked with the Attorney General's office, and it did help us narrow what we were looking at with regard to that particular audit. It doesn't come up very often, thankfully, but I don't anticipate any problems as far as our access to records and our ability to do the work the committee's asking us to do. And to the extent we can, for example, rely on work that's been done by others, we absolutely will do that. Even the CPA work, the Macias accounting audited financial statements, to the extent we can rely on that work, we will, and that hopefully will narrow or limit the amount of hours we have to put in. But what we have to do under audit standards is satisfy ourselves that work has been done up to standards we would expect, that we would follow. And sometimes that doesn't allow us to rely on other people's work, but it will certainly give us a head start.
Great. Well, I appreciate that, and I do understand that there's some due process considerations and protection of accused until proven guilty, et cetera. But I think to the extent that there can be cooperation and collaboration, and I'm encouraged to hear that the city is fully committed to being supportive and helpful as you conduct the audit. But so that was, you've answered my question, and I do hope that I don't know how many different criminal investigations there are, federal, state, local, but it might be worth trying to figure out, is there a coordinating body on those criminal investigations and prosecutions that you could connect with as you embark on this. Thank you.
Go ahead, Senator Anderson.
I'd like to thank the authors for bringing this forward, too. This is an appropriate use of an audit. I mean, here we have probably the greatest enterprise zone in California, in the city of Vernon, and fixing it certainly is the way to go. And I think that I'm very optimistic about this audit coming up with best practices and identifying how we can fix it rapidly. So I just want to thank you. I'll be supporting it today. And I just want to confirm, when we do the audit, will it come up with issues to address with best practices? I think that you addressed it before, but I just want to get confirmation.
Certainly, I think when we conduct all of the different tests that we've been asked to look at, the expenditure testing, looking at the city charter, the roles and responsibilities, who had the decision-making authority with regard to compensation. So all of the objectives, we intend to come up with recommendations, and certainly, if to the extent we can, identify best practices, yes.
That's fantastic. Thank you.
Let me add, Senator Anderson, when Mrs. Howell and her team finalizes the audit and obviously come to their conclusions, it's us as a policy body, Republicans, Democrats, bicameral manner, to come up and move proactively, if in fact it is our desire to do so, any policies with regards to the city of Vernon or any other cities of similar characteristics. So that would be our role.
Great. I believe Senator Norby has a question as well.
Thank you to the Speaker and to the Senator for bringing this forward. I know this is your part of the state. You're very concerned about it, and I look forward to the results of the audit, though my expectations of it might be more modest than some may be. Question for the auditor. You said you were going to compare Vernon with other comparable cities. What might those be?
Well, to the extent that's why we put in to the extent we can. When I looked at the actual compensation survey that they did. They did compare themselves to some other cities in Southern California.
What cities? I can think of one, City of Industry, maybe Sand City in Northern California, but are they talking about similar cities in size or similar cities in population?
I can quote from that because I just read this early this morning, to be quite honest with you. But the survey, and this was specific to compensation, this is a staff report that was provided to the city by Mr. Whitworth back in May of this year, and they compared themselves to Anaheim, Burbank, LA, Pasadena, Riverside, and the reason they compared themselves to those, according to this report, is that they were cities that have their own electric and water departments. They didn't specify that they compared them to because of size. They also selected another sample, the entity that did this survey for them, looking at Bell Gardens, Alhambra, Commerce, Compton, Huntington Park, Montebello, Southgate, etc. And those, according to this, were selected because they were within a certain radius of Vernon. So beyond that, I don't have anything specific, Mr. Norby, but that's why we put in the audit analysis to the extent we can identify a city that's similar to Vernon.
The difference between all those cities and Vernon, of course, is that those cities have an independent electorate. They have elections. They have an electorate that the government is accountable to. And that's why, I mean, all cities, all states, countries have cycles of corruption followed by cycles of reform, and those are very common. Usually when the corruption is great enough, then the electorate becomes aware of it through the media, through community organizations, and there's a healing process. And, of course, that's what Vernon lacks. It lacks an independent electorate, and that's why I'm very skeptical that no matter how much information comes out about it, without an independent electorate, I don't see how those reforms are going to occur. I mean, the mayor was in office 50 years unopposed until he was forced to resign under under a felony indictment. Decades go by without any elections. When you mention the term elected officials, I presume you're referring to people that actually have been elected or people that have positions which can be elected, because I don't know how many of the people in Vernon actually stood in any competitive election or not. Maybe that's something the audit could look at, because some of us have tried to get information on election and election results and actually vote tallies that have occurred in Vernon throughout the years, and they're very, very difficult to get. So that might be something that the audit might look at. I'm sure if it is public information, which it should be, either through the Register of Voters or through Vernon. Some cities go through the registrar, some hold their own elections, and that might be something worthwhile to get, because that's the core issue, is that there's no device, no accountability, and so I think ultimately Vernon either has to sell off its city housing and allow independent residents to live there, or allow developers, housing developers, to develop in those open parcels, or give the business owners themselves or the property owners a vote in city elections, which I know some governmental structures do. Water districts and some irrigation districts have that. But I think that's the core of the issue. Hopefully you can address that as much as possible. Yours is more of a financial audit, but those comparable cities are very different in significant ways.
Thank you, Mr. Norby. Are there any questions?
I would like to move
Great.
that we do the audit.
Senator Lamalfa.
Following on that, is it the county that administers the election for Vernon, or is it done internally by the city with county oversight? And I realize, it's a population of about 120 or so, so there is elections every 2 years. It's just whether anybody runs. It's a competitive election, right?
We follow the laws of the state of California. We use the county registrar and a third-party independent just for this reason.
It is the county, you say?
The county assists a third-party independent firm that also handles other elections for other cities.
Okay.
And that's one of the reasons why we do that, is so that we don't stand that scrutiny of controlling the election.
Okay, thank you. Just for the sake of time, I know we're going to start losing members, so I want to move on. I also, is there any other questions? Public comment? Anybody from the public? Great, thank you. Senator De Leon, I also want to thank you for your work on this issue, and absolutely thank the Speaker. I appreciate both of your leaderships to move this issue forward. And committee, to clarify, we'll be taking 2 votes today. The first is for the approval of the audit, and the second is to grant this audit priority. So there is a motion and a second to move the audit request. Secretary, please call the roll.
Lara?
Aye.
Lara, aye. Alejo? Alejo, aye. Donnelly? Donnelly, aye. Huber?
Aye.
Huber, aye. Monning? Norby? Norby, aye. Smythe? Smythe, aye. Alquist? Anderson?
Aye.
Anderson, aye. De Leon?
Aye.
De Leon, aye. Dutton?
Aye.
Dutton, aye. Lamalfa? Lamalfa, aye. Rubio? Wolk?
Aye.
Wolk, aye. Rubio? Rubio, aye.
Now we need a motion and a second to grant this request priority. There's a motion by Huber, second by Wolk. Secretary, please call the roll.
Lara?
Aye.
Lara, aye. Alejo? Donnelly?
Aye.
Donnelly, aye. Huber?
Aye.
Huber, aye. Monning?
Aye.
Monning, aye. Norby? Norby, aye. Smythe? Smythe, aye. Alquist? Anderson? Anderson, aye. De Leon?
Aye.
De Leon, aye. Dutton? Dutton, aye. Lamalfa? Lamalfa, aye. Rubio? Wolk? Wolk, aye.
Great. That request is approved and priority is granted. That concludes the business for the committee today. Thank you.